They discovered a reserve of 511 billion barrels of oil. And that's just one of the resources which is down there. Now, that's the biggest untouched oil deposit in the world by far. And you can think what that would do to sustain the powers who control that oil. Now, it's illegal for Russia to have even conducted these geological surveys into this oil reserve, let alone to exploit it.
This is CBS Eye on the World. I'm John Batchelor. I welcome my good colleague and mentor, Gregory Copley, editor and publisher of Defense and Foreign Affairs, the author most recently of Noble State, the story of constitutional monarchy, an enormous advantage over the American Republic. However, we attend first to a transnational organization that recently met in Rio de Janeiro. It's called BRICs. Stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. However, it's much larger than that in intentionality and in possibilities for the future. It's beginning to organize itself in a new fashion here in the 21st century, one that is both possible, but at the same time non-understandable to me, which is why I need Gregory's help. Gregory, a very good evening to you. The five big ones I read off, although South Africa is aspirational more than real, they've been adding members these last years. Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, the UAE, Indonesia all added. Saudi Arabia possibly hasn't confirmed it yet. What does this describe, Gregory? Is there a 20th century way to think about BRICS? Good evening to you.
BRICS has become a loose organization of countries which often have very little to do with each other, but were gathered together in recent years, largely at the driving of the People's Republic of China, one of the original countries in the BRIC coalition. And the PRC wanted to create an anti-dollar, anti-US global organization to, if you like, bring down a peg the US dollar denomination of the global economy as the global standby or reserve currency, because China wanted to make its currency, the renminbi or the yuan, basically an internationally tradable currency. Now, BRICS is an organization which didn't have any real coherence other than when it was thought of as a concept by a series of New York bankers. They saw basically places for the US to invest abroad. And they figured that the key economies to invest in were Brazil, Russia, India, and China. South Africa was added later, and as you say, really is more aspirational. But so BRICS was nothing really to do with states which had something in common with each other than that they were seen as a potentially good marketplace for US investment. Now, today, you've got a number of those countries, Russia, India, and the People's Republic of China, and Brazil to a degree, who do want some degree of relief from being forced to cooperate under US law by using US dollars as their main trading mechanism. Because the United States has essentially said, if you use the US dollar, you are subject to US law. So they say, well, we want to use our own currency, or we want to use other currencies or other mediums of payment, which could include barter and counter trade. Now, the BRICS momentum got underway when Russia and China, and to a degree India, really started organizing how to get this body as a cohesive group, which could, if you like, divide the world away from the dollar dependency. And it hasn't worked. The recent summit in Rio de Janeiro, hosted by President Lula da Silva on July 6th and 7th, basically seemed to be a failure, or it seemed to be anticlimactic. But it was not, in fact, unimportant, because what it decided was that, no, the BRICS countries, by and large, were not interested in refusing to deal with the US dollar altogether. They just wanted the freedom to use other modes of currency to avoid US law, and to use other mechanisms which could be more important on a bilateral nature, in a bilateral nature, like trade, barter trade, and counter trade, and that sort of thing. So that's where it's going. And the big decision at Rio this year was that BRICS shapes up as not being an anti-American or anti-dollar mechanism. And this is big news. And it was inevitable in many respects because none of the other currencies in the world have either the tradability and strength, nor do they have the mass numbers of currency units out there in the world to be used. And that's where the US dollar remains very, very strong and competitive and will likely remain so for some time. But what we have to realize is that, yes, the US dollar is under pressure and to a degree under threat, largely because the incredible profitability of the last 40 or 50 years in terms of trade and wealth generation has been as a result of the end of the World War II, the open lines of trade and supply chain, which have benefited all countries. So the United States today is no longer the sole source of funding and economic strength. Other countries have risen. So the United States then proportionately has less of the world's economy under its control. So that process is likely to go up and down for the foreseeable future. But the reality is that the United States economy in its own right has grown enormously, will continue to be very powerful. Countries will still want to rely on the dollar because they know it has a relatively stable value. So it's going to be there forever. But other countries have expressed their independence from the United States and from, if you like, other parenting organizations, whether that's the UN or BRICs itself, or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, because they want to have some flexibility. They want to have some say over their own economies. They don't want to be dictated to by the IMF or the World Bank, which sometimes don't understand their conditions. So right now, I think it's actually a win for the US dollar. It's a win for the countries involved in BRICS and other countries around the world. Now, the United States may wish to continue to impose the dollar, and to do that, it will need to work a lot on its alliances and on its prestige and credibility, because what we're seeing in recent years under several administrations in the US is that US prestige, credibility, trust, and friendship around the world have declined significantly and continue to decline. So there's a job out there for the US to do, but the reality is that the dollar is not under the kind of threat that the media have been saying for the last 3 or 4 years, that the sky was falling on the dollar.
Let me read a list of what are called partner countries and see if this fills in where they could be going with this. Algeria, Belarus, Bolivia, Cuba, Kazakhstan, Malaysia, Nigeria, Thailand, Turkey, Uganda, Uzbekistan, and Vietnam. Gregory, no matter how I look at this, that doesn't add up to anything. It's all over the place. It's Central Asia, it's Nigeria, it's Africa, it's the Caribbean. It's kind of like, who you invited to your birthday party was your 6th grade class. There's nothing in common except for once in a while you go to school together. What are they?
That's about it.
What are they shaping? If it's not the dollar, what is the appeal? What do they get out of it?
Well, they do get some multilateral and bilateral trade understandings with each other, that Vietnam can deal with Nigeria and trade manufactured goods for Nigerian oil, or they will accept naira for Vietnamese exports, or vice versa. They each accepting each other's currencies. What China and Russia, but particularly the People's Republic of China, is trying to do is to recreate what we used to call the non-aligned movement or the Third World, where this becomes a geopolitical bloc aimed at furthering the global reach, if you like, of the parent superpower, in this case, Beijing. And that's not going to work, I don't think, at this stage, largely because the PRC doesn't have any strength in its currency and its own economy is declining rapidly. And you've got the other side of the coin, is that many of the states within BRICS are hostile with other member states of BRICS. India and China are very much strategically at odds. China and Russia are very much at odds with each other, something which is coming out even more dramatically over the past few days. So the situation of this being a cohesive strategic bloc for Beijing to wage war with against the West is not realistic. And in fact, as the BRICS member states, including Brazil, get their act together, they're starting to see that, look, there are times when we're not going to want to deal with US dollars and we don't like Washington, but we're not going to cut off our nose to spite our face. We're going to deal in dollars when it's desirable to do so.
And we should then look upon the BRICS as available to all parties, not just China and Russia. They clearly have relations with Europe and with the United States at the same time. So they're in play. I'm trying to come up with a metaphor that describes such a melange of states.
Well, exactly. I think that BRICS is in play and, as you say, available to all comers, and the member states and the overall body will listen to anybody in the same way that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization states of Central Asia are available to do deals with the Europeans or the United States as much as they are with states within Eurasia. So there is nothing there which basically binds them in a NATO-like organization or something like that. It's a very loosely structured organization, and one which has built a new secretariat in the hopes of building something which gives them control of the greater part of the world's economy, but really is no defined strategic objective other than, how do we avoid being dictated to by some power, whether it's Washington or Beijing or Moscow.
We go to the question of a cliche. I love this cliche. The generals always fight the last war. Is that right and wrong at the same time, Gregory?
Well, it's becoming very interesting because it's obvious that people base their actions and their future actions on their own experience, what they've done in the past, what worked for them in the past, what scared them in the past, what didn't work for them in the past, and so on. So we all, if you like, fight yesterday's wars in our conduct of daily life and in our future activities. The key is, how do you get over that? And everyone's always trying to look at lessons of recent wars and then throw them into a think tank which says, well, okay, how does this apply in light of probable new technologies and the like? And lately, this whole pool is becoming more murky because the wars are rolling on and on. We're learning a lot of new lessons as the technology rolls out. And as we see from, say, the Ukraine-Russia war, there were a lot of old practices, or should we say recent practices which worked very well in the Gulf War and the like, not working well in Russia-Ukraine. We saw the increase in drone warfare, as it's called, unmanned aerial vehicles, unmanned maritime vehicles and the like. And then for a brief period, we saw, well, that's going to be the wave of the future conflicts. So everybody is busily focusing on UAVs and loitering munitions, drones, which basically are on one-way missions to bomb a target. Essentially, though, what then developed from that, naturally, as is the case throughout all history, is that an offensive weapon will create a defensive countermeasure. And there are now enormous strides being made in drone countermeasures, things to take care of, neutralize or shoot down unmanned aerial vehicles and the like, new approaches in, if you like, anti-submarine warfare, which now are moving away from looking at just manned submarines, but looking at how to deal with a proliferation of unmanned submarines. So the debate then gets down to, what's the cost of your offensive weapon versus the cost of your defensive weapons? And that's what shapes the success of offensive versus defensive countermeasures. You look at if your offensive weapons are massively cheaper than your countermeasures, your defensive measures, then the offense has the chance to win, because all you have to do with these cheap offensive weapons is keep saturating the battlefield with those weapons and those technologies. That's what we saw in not only in Russia, Ukraine, but in the Ethiopian wars and the like, throwing lots of very cheap drones against expensive targets like tanks, artillery, and the like. And then what we started to see naturally triggering was the rise of cheap countermeasures. So as the countermeasures have become economical, we saw the Israeli tanks, for example, in Gaza. Tanks normally don't fare well in urban warfare, and certainly not in conditions where you've got drones opposing them. But the Israelis developed a whole range of very economical countermeasures, and the tanks do very, very well in urban warfare as a result, because they've made the defensive countermeasures cheaper than the offensive weapons. Where Israel, for example, has a problem is that their Iron Dome situation and their Jacob's Sling and their Arrow 3 anti-missile defense systems, they were very, very expensive, and the Iranians were throwing at them very, very low cost, if you like, weapons, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drone attacks. So eventually the Iranians and Israel's opponents knew that all they had to do was get enough cheap weapons against Israel, and Israel's very expensive Iron Dome and so on would run out of ammunition simply because it was so expensive and difficult to manufacture. So now the Iranians never got to the stage of having enough weapons to overwhelm, to swarm, if you like, the Israelis to a sufficient degree. So they haven't yet won that. And the Israelis are looking now at cheaper anti-missile capabilities, such as we saw being evolved during the Cold War with SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative, which my old partner, Dr. Stefan Pisoni, pioneered, of having space-based energy weapons where you could use
30 seconds.
Where you could use very low-cost weapons to down these missiles. So that's what we're coming back to now. And it's going to be about costs of defense and costs of offense.
The 1959 Antarctica Treaty, it looks upon the possession of parts of Antarctica and what's underneath. Remember, this is a continent. Unlike the North Pole, the Arctic, which is all ice, Antarctica is covered by ice in the last, I believe, 34 million years. But underneath it is a rich resource in all directions. And perhaps it's emerging, perhaps not. But recent discoveries suggest that you can plumb some of the resources underneath the ice field. And yet, Gregory, the Antarctica Treaty, I believe, is fussy about possession. Is it being ignored by our colleagues?
Well, yes, it is. The Antarctica Treaty was designed to create or to designate Antarctica as a terra nullius, a no man's land in perpetuity, so that it could be preserved for its ecological value to the world, its influence on world weather patterns, oceanographic patterns, and the like. But what's happened since the 1959 Antarctic Treaty is that countries which have no geographic proximity or geographic claim to the territory have started interfering big time. And that's countries like Russia, India, the People's Republic of China, and the PRC in particular, I might add. They've got 5 Antarctic stations now online, each with their airfields and the like, and doing, quote, scientific research, which somehow seems to coincide with their orbital command and control systems for orbital nuclear and hypersonic weapons, such as the polar orbit launch of hypersonic missiles, which they tested a couple of years ago. The Russians have been doing much the same. But what we saw recently, which really shows that that terra nullius is really going to be the next big geopolitical scramble, is that the Russians, a Russian state-owned oil company, was doing, quote, research in the Antarctic region, in the Weddell Sea area, largely in the British sphere of influence, and they discovered a reserve of 511 billion barrels of oil. And that's just one of the resources which is down there. Now, that's the biggest untouched oil deposit in the world by far. And you can think what that would do to sustain the powers who control that oil. Now, it's illegal for Russia to have even conducted these geological surveys into this oil reserve, let alone to exploit it. But do you think this is going to last for very long? Russia and the People's Republic of China have been conducting their own fora, seminars and the like, on how to manage the Antarctic situation, to put it politely. Now, there is the Antarctica Treaty Organization, which has its secretariat based in Buenos Aires. They just had their seminar a month or so ago in Italy, and there were 450 delegates to that. Not one of them mentioned the geopolitical rivalry over the Antarctic. And you had all these academics, most of them from all around Europe and so on, having a wonderful 2-week holiday in Rome, or where it was in Italy, Turin, I think it was. But anyway, they were busy discussing various ecological issues, not one of them mentioning the responsibilities or liabilities that go with protecting the Antarctic. What's equally significant is that the control, so-called, of the Antarctic continent is based on the exposure a country has, geographic exposure a country has to the landmass, to the South Pole. So, for example, Australia is obviously the country which has the greatest land exposure to the South Pole. So it comes down into a pie shaped toward the South Pole. That's an enormous quantity of land. Britain has access to the South Pole and the Antarctic region by virtue of its land exposure from the Falkland Islands, South Georgia Island, and so on in the South Atlantic, and some other possessions in the region. So that has a smaller slice. Chile and Argentina have a similar claim to narrow wedges of that region as well. South Africa also. India and the Northern Hemisphere powers don't have any land exposure to Antarctica, but yet they are the ones building these research stations. And to get a picture of how the Chinese are trying to keep their work there very, very secretive, they have the airfields alongside their research stations. And theoretically, under the treaty, all other treaty members are able to just drop in and use those airfields and come and visit and discuss scientific advances by either parties. And yet the Chinese airfields there are inaccessible because they block them off. They park their own aircraft across the airfield so that nobody else can land there. So we know that they're not encouraging visitors and scientific discussion. They're doing something quite separate. And we know that that's largely to do with their fractional orbital bombardment system, their polar orbit military satellites, as well as the control of Chinese GPS satellites and the like. And presumably the Soviets are doing much the same thing. So it's very interesting that everybody's trying to get a slice of this. They're all lying predominantly about their activities there. The only ones that are doing nothing are the Australians, New Zealanders, and the South Africans, who arguably got the largest claims, and they're not investing as they should. They're allowing the Chinese, the Russians, and others to build stations on their territory of the Antarctic, as defined by the treaty. So how long this Antarctica Treaty is going to hold is anybody's guess, because I think already it's been broken, and we are now seeing a massive illegal use of Antarctica, and it would behoove countries like Australia, with its close proximity, direct proximity to Antarctica, to revive its Antarctic work in a huge way, given that they also pioneered a lot of the exploration of Antarctica in years and decades gone past. But they're not doing it because the present government is too busy worrying about China to the north.
Yes, you mentioned Albanese at the end, Anthony Albanese, who was
Mm.
recently in Shanghai making ambiguous statements, as I remember, about Taiwan, about China in general. The Albanese government is staying away from this issue entirely.
Well,
They're no
mm.
comment. They have comment on almost everything.
Well, they don't comment on it because it's like not important. It's not getting enough public opinion railing against the government inactivity, because the public got so many things to rail against, including constantly rising taxes and inflation, and the inability of households to even pay their utility bills. And yet, so they'll put pressure on the government about that. But little things like Antarctica, which has been asleep for so long as far as the public consciousness is concerned, can just slip away. And before you know it, we'll be in that situation as Britain was in 1939, totally wishing the world would stay peaceful in our time.
This is a version of what's going on in the Arctic, where
Of
there's no
course.
land involved, just ice and territory and perhaps the fishes, but also the possibility of resources at the bottom of the Arctic Ocean. But I go to, and Albanese is aware of the fact that this is a continent. He is, and nobody has a better claim than the people who discovered it, which would be the British public and the UK government. And Australia was part of the UK government for a long time. It is the same king. Nobody
Mm.
has a better claim. Is anyone in London advancing this claim? Are they challenging with Canberra silent? It seems to me that the responsibility falls to London.
It should do, particularly as the UK is now part of AUKUS with Australia, the UK, and the United States, and they've a definite interest in this because it's part of the global security framework. But yet, London is not worrying about AUKUS that much either, because it's totally preoccupied with domestic political issues and economic issues. So you find, even in the United States, people are preoccupied with with some local scandal in Washington rather than with the realities of global affairs. Getting people in the United States to focus on Antarctica is equally difficult. And the United States really needs its allies like the UK and Australia and New Zealand if it's going to prosecute any strategic domination or, if you like, constraint or care for Antarctica in the future. Because what we will see very rapidly from here on is massive plundering of the Antarctic continent and the seas around it and the seabed around it, which will do enormous damage. And yet, by the time the outcry arises, it's going to be too late.
Argentina and Chile also have claims, and Argentina is a country that is undergoing a transformation right now to the positive. So it also could show up at the bar. But who is convening this bar? It looks to be that everybody's looking to exploit it. Nobody's looking to enforce either the treaty or the logic of having a piece of Antarctica for historical circumstances. I mean, the ice is not going to melt tomorrow. Even by the end of the century, I think the ice is going to still be there, no matter how dramatic they are about global warming.
Mm.
So it's a puzzle to me that you've discovered something that isn't being argued. We argue everything, Gregory. Is it China intimidating Argentina? I can't believe that.
Well, certainly China has been intimidating Argentina in the past until Milei came into office a year and a bit ago, because China has space research facilities in Argentina to which the Argentine government is not allowed access under a treaty by an earlier left-wing government in Buenos Aires. So what we've got now is this situation where Milei is trying to protest that, and he knows the connection between the Chinese Antarctic bases and the Argentine bases and other Chinese bases up and down the Americas. So yeah, Milei is very, very conscious of this, and I think needs to start taking a greater leadership role as well, especially as the Antarctica Treaty Secretariat is based in Buenos Aires. It's being funded by 40 or 50 countries right now, and yet it's being run as a holiday camp for academic researchers who are having a lot of fun with this, but they have no interest in the geopolitical control of this, which is really the first requisite if you're going to preserve Antarctica's ecological purity and the like. So the academics and the scientists should be welcoming someone taking a strong hand for geopolitical reasons on Antarctica, but they're not doing so. But nobody, including the United States, has made a move to strong arm and rebuild the Antarctica Treaty Secretariat. And that's something, well, as I say, Millet could be doing with Albanese in Australia if the Australians could get off their backsides.
Yes, I'm not even going to ask about Starmer. He's busy dealing with his own backbench. But I am going to go to this detail that you provide about the PRC blocking off its airports. That's incorrect. A complete, obvious challenge to the treaty. Is there an enforcement mechanism in the treaty?
Well, there's not, and that's the problem. In fact, the treaty expressly says that no military personnel or vehicles can go down there for other than support and search and rescue and the like, and support of the scientific and peaceful endeavors. So we know that the People's Republic of China has proved masterful in using decoy organizations, whether they call them their fisheries patrol, their Coast Guard, or the like, which are really closet military instruments to enforce their will, as they're doing now in the South China Sea against Vietnam and the Philippines and the like. So there's going to have to be somebody starting to interpret what's going on there and starting to say, okay, what about enforcement? Because even the threat of, if you like, increased sanctions against the People's Republic of China for their abuse of the Antarctica Treaty would be appropriate. It might not be sufficient and it might not actually do enough, but there's got to be some suggestion that there are costs involved in breaches of the Antarctic security so that the world can start to move to the next phase, which will probably be the carve up of Antarctica by different countries. And they'll start along this by the lines of the pie chart, domination of the continent, which, as I say, gives Australia the greatest obligation to protect a huge proportion of that area.
My good friend Gregory Copley, who always surprises me with his King Charles reports. This week, it wouldn't have occurred to me to ask about gardening. Gregory, I'm a gardener. I take it very seriously as a hobby. It is extremely philosophical. Is the king a gardener?
The king is absolutely a devoted gardener and passionate about gardening without the use of pesticides and herbicides and the like, trying to use natural remedies for to control invasive species or and the like, to keep the gardens growing without and flourishing without using, if you like, modern chemicals. And he's done this very well throughout the Duchy of Cornwall, which were the estates which were under his control when he was Prince of Wales. The Duchy of Cornwall now has passed to Prince William, who's the new Prince of Wales. But the king managed to do a little carve out of his private part of the Duchy of Cornwall, which contains Highgrove House and the acreage around it. And Highgrove House has been his personal home for many decades now, and he brought it from a state of ruin to perfection now, where people can go and visit the gardens and the like. And it is incredibly beautiful. And he's had a staff there of gardeners, I think 8 or 9 gardeners at any one time, and they have been working on this heavily. And if you think, nice to have 8 or 9 gardeners working around your home, that sounds like easy pickings. But the New York Times actually did a piece on this some time ago, saying that the way in which King Charles has been working as prince and as king on this garden it makes it an incredibly difficult and challenging job, so that the gardeners were constantly overworked, and some of the junior gardeners were, paid, a basic wage you'd expect for someone doing gardening light duties. But in the last 2 years, since the king has been preoccupied down in Whitehall, what's happened is that they've lost about 11 of the 12 staff they had over the 2 years, to the point where there's now only the one gardener there. And the British media have been making much of this, saying that the king was a slave driver, expecting too much work, for paying too little wages and the like. But it really is a difficult job, because the king is very exacting. I mean, he's, as with everything about his work, he's a workaholic. I think he would even put Donald Trump to shame there. He works around the clock, and he, even in his memos, he's correcting grammar and punctuation. He's so meticulous about things, as he is with the garden. And, he knows a lot about it. So he's making sure that plants are in the right place for their best growth possibilities and the like. So he's constantly, if you like, interfering with the gardeners and talking to them. And some of them didn't, thought they were being somewhat overmanaged, which could be the case. But the results speak for themselves. The king has been doing wonderful things, not only with the garden at Highgrove House, but with the Duchy of Cornwall, where he had the
30
farms,
seconds, Gregory, 30 seconds.
The farms there producing an incredible array of really beautiful fruits and vegetables and the like, and jams and so on. So it's an interesting aspect of his life that he is committed to this really ecologically sound and spiritually sound approach to gardening.
Philosophical, too. Gregory Copley, editor and publisher of Defense and Foreign Affairs. I'm off to look at the King's Garden. I'm John Batchelor.